I wanted to start with something fun and lighthearted before I ruin it for everyone. So we've been studying the FOAS, the Father of all sermons, the Last Supper discourse of Jesus, where he met with his friends prior to the crucifixion. And in this passage, he starts comparing the pain of childbirth with about what the disciples are about to experience. And so thus the video. And you guys know me. I'm a Christian nihilist to a certain extent, so I always bring stuff down and see the worst in situations. So I wanted to name this sermon, Life Sucks, and if it doesn't right now, just wait. But it gets better. But I decided not to go with that. And instead, I'm not even going to say that in church. I decided instead to go with something my mom always said, which is, this too shall pass. There's a lot I'm thankful for my mom, and one of those things is she said this all the time, whether it was the pain of getting your wisdom teeth cut out, or financial situations, or stuff at the job, or stuff at my taekwondo classes that was hard, or whatever it was. She would always say, this too shall pass, meaning when there's sadness, happiness is always around the corner. When there's darkness, light is always coming soon. And what we find in this passage from Jesus that we're about to read, and it's a long passage, so you're going to have to bear with me, but we find that he talks about how pain becomes pleasure and sorrow becomes joy. Mourning turns to rejoicing and turmoil turns to peace. Confusion becomes clarity, separation becomes reunion, darkness becomes light, and death becomes life. Now, he doesn't say each of these specifically. He does touch on some of them. But we're going to talk about the juxtaposition between these two today. And the Christian nihilist in me wants to hammer the left side of this equation. That's just, I'm an Eeyore of sorts. And I promise I'm not going to do that today. Because what happens is, when we do that, we miss the punchline. We miss the entirety of the gospel. Because the gospel says that this right side of the slide is going to bump off the left side of the slide forever. That the left side doesn't last and the right side does. Period. End of story. So the list becomes this. Pleasure and joy and rejoicing and peace and so forth. The right side bumps out the left. In every epic tale, there's a buildup of trouble. Every good story has it. Pain and suffering and turmoil and difficulty and hardship. That's the making of a good novel. I have a sister that reads the last few pages of a story before she'll read the story to find out if it's a good ending. And I just think that's an abomination against God to do so. But the point is, what you find on the left here is always a prelude to what's on the right. The left side, the suffering that you're enduring, the hardship you're facing, the challenging relationships, the financial difficulties, the health stuff, Lisa's health stuff, the divorce, the abandonment, the pain, the abuse, whatever you've endured, is always a prelude. It's part of the story, and it's undeniable that it's part of the story, and it's undeniable that it's going to be a part of the story, and that's what we're going to talk about. But don't be surprised when it happens. But it is a prelude. This list is coming. From now on in this sermon, I'm going to call the left side of this list the bad stuff and the right side the good stuff. And I promise this is not a political statement, so if anybody quotes me saying the left is bad and the right is good, get out of here. It just happens to happen that in order of the prelude, what comes first is the bad, and what comes second is the good, often. So we're going to jump into the text, and like I said, it's a long text. We could read segments of it, but at the end of it, we're going to be able to say we read the Last Supper discourse in church. So here we go. Jesus went on to say, in a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me. At this, some of his disciples said to one another, what does he mean by saying, in a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me, and because I am going to the Father? They kept asking, what does he mean by this, a little while? We don't understand what he's saying. And Jesus saw that they wanted to ask him about this, so he said to them, they repeat this a lot. Are you asking one another what I meant when I said, in a little while you'll see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me? He says, very truly I tell you, this gets into the meat of the text, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. So with you. Now is your time of grief. But I will see you again and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. In that day you will no longer ask me anything. Very truly I tell you, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. Until now you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. He continues, though I've been speaking figuratively, a time is coming when I will no longer use this kind of language, but I will tell you plainly about my Father. In that day you will ask in my name. I'm not saying that I will ask the Father on your behalf. No, the Father himself loves you because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. I came from the Father and entered the world. Now I'm leaving the world and going back to the Father. Then his disciples said, now you're speaking clearly and without figures of speech. Now we can see that you know all things and that you do not even need to have anyone ask you questions. This makes us believe that you come from God. Do you now believe? Jesus replied, a time is coming and in fact has come when you will be scattered, each to your own home. You will leave me all alone, yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me. He says, I have told you these things so that in me, and this is kind of the gist of the passage, in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So we're going to emphasize, so there's a lot we could draw from this text, and I'm drawing one particular thing, and I recognize that. We're kind of skirting through some of it. But he touches on certain things that deal with this pain to pleasure theme that we're going with. He says, in a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me. It's important to point out that, and we've said it so many times in here, that Jesus' miracles always have a figurative and a literal meaning behind it. So when he touches blind eyes and heals blind people, he's touching literal blind eyes, but he's figuratively opening people's eyes. When he feeds hungry people, he's literally feeding people, but he's feeding the existential hunger that people have. And the resurrection accomplishes just that. And so the passage is specifically talking about the coming time with the resurrection, but we can extrapolate it to a bigger picture. When he says, you'll see me no more and then you'll see me, it's talking about separation becomes reunion. Goodbyes become hello. He says, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. Weeping and mourning will turn into joy and rejoicing. When a baby is born, the woman forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. Once again, anguish turns to joy. So you see this theme in his words. He says, I've been speaking figuratively, and a time is coming when I will no longer use that kind of language, but I will tell you plainly. So confusion and blurriness and kind of shadows become clarity. So he's talking about the bad becoming good in this passage, in his discourse to his disciples. Pain and sorrow become pleasure and joy. Mourning becomes rejoicing. Separation, reunion, and so forth. And we can extrapolate this to what they call the great reverse. Sickness becomes health. Those who are sick will become healthy. Those who are blind will see. Those who are hungry will be full. Those who are poor will be made rich. Those who are in bondage will be set free. It's the gospel. He's describing the gospel here and encapsulating it in the coming resurrection. So I'm going to share a fact here that at first glance seems like my inner Eeyore is coming out, and it gives us a lot of discomfort, but when you really focus in on it, it can be really helpful in hard times. And that's the fact that, number one, bad is predicted, prophesied, and promised. You shouldn't be surprised when you find yourself in hard times. You're not cursed or targeted or abandoned when things are hard. You're simply human. And it's predicted, prophesied, and promised that humans are going to have it hard for a while. So you don't find, you're not abandoned. I found that I've talked to a lot of people about faith matters over the last few decades at this point. And one of the things that I find when people leave the faith or don't want to have anything to do with the faith, a lot of times it has to do with this bad list versus this good list. The argument goes that the bad exists, but the Christians describe. So you've got this list. Pain, sorrow, mourning, turmoil, and such exist. I'm experiencing it acutely in some cases. I've seen it. It's awful. It's horrible. And Christians claim that there's a God who is a God of the right list. And how can there be a God of the right list when the left list is primarily what I'm experiencing. And I just want to say that Christianity never shies away from this. It predicts and prophesies and promises that this will be the reality for a while. I pulled out some scriptures, and it was super easy to find them because there's lots of them. The scriptures are replete with references to suffering being a reality and something you're going to endure. You're going to endure the pain of people. You're going to endure the pain of a body that's collapsing. It's going to happen. It's unavoidable. The psalmist said, many are the afflictions of the righteous. This one I saw this morning. On my screen, it looks totally normal. But I thought it was so ironic. Man is born to trouble as surely as sparks fly upward. Stuff's going to go wrong. I could have fixed this by shrinking the text down on the screen a little bit, and I did for a moment. And I thought, it's kind of illustrative of what I'm talking about here. Stuff is going to blow it. There's gremlins in the system. Not everything is going to go right all the time. If you've ever been to Chewy's restaurant, I love it. They have a tile floor. It's not that I love Chewy's. I love Chewy's, but they have a tile floor, and it's this pattern that gets repeated over and over. And right in the middle of the floor, at multiple places within the store, are tiles that are rotated 90 degrees and improperly rotated. And they stand out like a sore thumb. Like they stand out as like, that's an ugly tile that didn't belong there. What were they thinking? And if you ask the employees in management, it's precisely to illustrate that not everything is going to always go your way. Not everything is always going to be systematic and beautiful. I thought it was pretty interesting that a restaurant would do that. 1 Peter says, do not be surprised at the fiery trial that has come to you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. Don't think it strange when hard times come. Think it normal. I like this one. 1 Thessalonians, trials. You know quite well that we are destined for them. And I would take it one step further and say not only is bad predicted and prophesied and promised, this list of pain and sorrow and mourning and turmoil and so forth. Calling the left bad is a little bit of a misnomer because ultimately, let me think how I want to say this. It's the quantitative properties of the left that make the right so glorious. The extent of your pain will directly impact the joy of your pleasure. As you go down this list, what is rejoicing without mourning? If mourning weren't a potentiality, if it weren't possible, what does the word rejoicing even mean? What is peace if there is no war, there is no conflict? This is an area that I agree with the Taoists in. It's kind of the yin and the yang, is that bad and good. I'm going to say it like this. Bad is predicted, prophesied, and promised, but 1B is that bad is predicated, meaning it's necessary. So it's not just that bad things will happen. It's kind of like bad things have to happen, philosophically, theologically. What is courage without fear? Or virtue without temptation and vice? And so forth. To define words, to even exist in a world where there is joy, means we have to exist in a world where there is at least the potentiality of sorrow. It's unavoidable. It's philosophically untenable. It's logically untenable that joy could exist without sorrow, that peace could exist without clarity, that life could exist without death, that hellos exist without separation and goodbye. I recognize that we're deep in the weeds right now, and this is a conversation for another day and like an over-the-table conversation probably. But I just want to say that it's a dark, dark world in some sense, and it kind of has to be for it to be a world full of love, which gets into some real deep theological weeds. But I say it all to say, don't be surprised. Don't be shocked when things are hard. Don't be shocked when your work goes bad or your relationships go bad or your body starts faltering. We're in a system where it not only is Christian theology not only says it's going to happen, philosophy and Christian theology kind of say it has to happen. This is a friend, Trixie Armstrong, who contacted me a couple weeks ago. Her best friend was murdered last year. And last week, another person that she knew personally was murdered by the same person that murdered her friend. And then he was surrounded by cops and took his own life. And she was in turmoil about it. And in the conversation we talked about, and there's some trigger warnings here, this is intense stuff, but the bad world is real. We talked about her childhood rape and abuse, the fact that the love of her life took their own life. She's been homeless, she's been abused religiously, and she has a daughter that has a debilitating at times illness that she deals with. It's a hard, hard life. But she uses her experiences and the wisdom that she's drawn through the pain and through the difficulty and through the suffering to help in a ministry to people with addiction issues that need to be in recovery. And she's done it for years, and it's a hard ministry. It comes with its own difficulties. But my point here is that this death that she's experienced is turning into life for herself and for others. And it always has been that way, and it always will be. That's the climax of the story with Jesus. About a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago now, there was a wreck with the UPS plane here in Louisville. I was talking to a pilot friend of mine yesterday who happens to be in the know about the situation and exactly what went wrong. And he said, there's not a pilot alive that could have saved that plane. He said something went wrong mechanically that was just devastating, and there was no saving it. But Andrew Lutz is here with us this morning, and he and his family lost a very close personal friend and his granddaughter, a 3-year-old little girl, that were both killed in that wreckage. For days, they didn't know. They just knew that their phones were disconnected, that they weren't answering the phone, and they were probably at ground zero, but it was confirmed later. And so with Trixie's situation, you can say, here's light that's coming into the darkness. Here's life that's coming out of the death. But sometimes there's going to be situations where it just feels useless. There's going to be times in life where the bad that's predicted and prophesied and promised, it doesn't feel like there's any resolution to it. It doesn't feel like any light or goodness can come out of it. And that's where Jesus' story comes in. Because number 2 point, it's not only that it's promised and prophesied, predicted, and predicated, it's that it's passing. I didn't mean for all that alliteration to be there, I promise. But this is one thing that draws me to a Jesus-centered faith, not away from a Jesus-centered faith. So many people, when suffering comes into the picture, they abandon the faith of Jesus. They say it doesn't make sense to me. But this is one of the things that I hold deeply in my heart that holds me to it, is that it's kind of the only thing that gives hope. The resurrection is the only hope we have. When we talk about pain and sorrow and mourning and turmoil and so forth, there's either a world where this is all there is, the left side of the column. Richard Dawkins, who's a naturalist, described a world without God as pitiless indifference. It's all you get. And it shouldn't be surprising. So there's that world where God is not in the picture of atheism or anti-theism. Then there's a world of theism, and specifically the world of Christian theism in Jesus. And Jesus paints a picture that pleasure and joy and rejoicing and peace is the way of the world. It will be. It's coming. He doesn't skirt around the fact that the left side is hard. He doesn't skirt around the fact that it exists, it's predicated. He just says there is a solution. So in this world where planes crash and murder happens, Jesus says, your weeping will become rejoicing. It will happen. Give it time. Follow my plan. Follow my path. He compares it to childbirth, and I'll say it like this, I've experienced childbirth, and it was awful. Here's a picture of kind of illustrates how I experienced it. Says I had to settle for delivery because someone didn't feel like cooking tonight. I was talking to my therapist this week about. I know. I realize there's toxic masculinity in this, but I was talking to my therapist this week about how childbirth was an interesting moment of empathy in that it was so predicted, so promised. We're so ready for it. I personally felt like disassociated with it, which will become important as we talk for a second. But I want to tell briefly, I've told the stories about my wife's pregnancy before. But at one point, the monitor in her contractions, it goes up when the contraction gets hard and goes down when it gets easier. And it was getting over a 10 on the scale. And she was saying, I don't think I can do this. This is too hard. So I went to the nurse's station and said, it's over a 10 already, and she's really uncomfortable. Is there anything you can do? And she said, oh, sweetie, it'll be over 100 before it's all over. And when it got to that point, we did Lamaze classes, or the Bradley method is what they call it, where it's breathing, and I'm sitting on the side of her bed saying, okay, breathe. And she looks at me and she says, this Bradley stuff is crap. And I was forbidden to speak to her for the rest of the situation, for the rest of the birth. She found it easier to pace during the contractions, so she would get up and pace, and she would kick the trash can and beat on the wall, just like you saw the guy in the video do. And at one point she was screaming, I can't do this, during the pushing. I can't do this, get it out of me. I hope none of you are pregnant right now, I'm sorry. But after the child was born, she was laying there exhausted, and she said these words. She said, that was 1,000 times worse than I ever thought it could be. I'm never doing that again. And the nurse pulled back the curtain, and two of our pregnant friends were standing there with like deer in the headlights. It was Becky Lyle was one of them, and Kathleen Brooks was another. And they were both like 7 or 8 months pregnant at that point. And all they heard when they walked into the room to rejoice with her was, it's way worse than you expected. I say all that to show you a picture of just a few hours, like 8 hours later, or even 5 or 6 hours later. It went from I can't do this to I did and it was worth it. And this is the illustration Jesus gives. He says this is what it's going to be like for your disciples, and in a broader picture, he's saying this is what it's going to be in life. It's, I'm never doing that again, to within days she said we should try again. I'm convinced it's because she wanted my body, but this is the picture. So let's bring it down. If you're walking through something and you're saying, I can't do this, it's impossible. Get this out of me. Anguish. Jesus paints a picture of here that's going to turn around. It's going to turn into a picture like this. It's all going to be worth it in the end. He always makes the bad list the good. It's always a prelude. Your suffering is only temporary. I want to pause and say that I'm not just talking specifically about heaven, but I'm talking about even on earth. You're going to see pinpricks of light in the darkness. Jesus said, let your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He was constantly saying, turn around and change the way you think and change the way you observe life, because the kingdom of heaven is near. It's close by. The right, the good, the joy, the rejoicing and peace and clarity is always accessible. So when we read the scriptures that say many are the afflictions of the righteous, what it's immediately followed with, and I didn't share with you before, is it says many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers them from them all. That passage we read that says, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on to test you, as though something strange were happening to you, is followed by this, immediately, but rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. Which brings up the third point, is that bad is beaten. This bit that he did where he was talking about goodbye becomes hello, and mourning becomes rejoicing, and the pain of childbirth produces the joy of birth, and blurriness and confusion becomes clarity. It was in response to a question they asked. They said, what do you mean here? They repeated this question like 4 times in the script. It says, what do you mean here? In a little while, we're not going to see you, and then we are going to see you. What was he talking about? This is like the central question of all Christianity. When he said you're not going to see me, then you are going to see me, what does he mean? I'm going to die, and then I'm going to be alive again. He's talking about the resurrection. So all this big setup where the blind see and the deaf hear and the hungry are filled and the chains are broken off the captives, the great reverse. In a world of entropy where thermodynamics reigns and decay is inevitable, death doesn't come as a surprise. Sorrow doesn't come as a surprise. It's the resurrection that's shocking. It's the resurrection that's amazing. And so when we look at this list, his response is, I've told you these things. I've told you that suffering is going to happen. Mourning is going to happen. Pain is going to happen. Don't be surprised. Don't be shocked. Don't feel like there's something wrong with you. Don't feel like you've been abandoned. But instead, just almost, I want to say, succumb to its inevitability. Like it's going to happen. But rejoicing is always around the corner. Always in Christ. So what's our response? I didn't want this to be a platitude. I didn't want it to be like hand-waving pain, because we're talking about real people in real situations, real people who've experienced abandonment, real people whose bodies are collapsing on them, real people who don't know how they're going to pay their bills. But in some sense, it comes down to trusting that the God of the resurrection has a plan and a path. It's embracing. I've heard it called kiss the frog or embrace the suck or hug the cross. But whatever analogy you want to use is realizing that your pain is going to amplify the promise. The hardship that you endure is going to make the joy all the more joyful in time. And then it's just wait. Wait and watch your Savior work. I have spent an inordinate amount of time trying to define the word gospel, because we talk about preaching the gospel or the importance of the gospel and what is that word. And I'm still a bit confused on what the elevator pitch version of the gospel is. I don't think there is one. I think elevator pitches diminish it every time. But there's this equation that's very brief that I think can really help us zero in on figuring out what the definition of the gospel is. And it's this: bad equals prelude. It's always just the start of the story. The death is always the start of the resurrection. The sorrow is always the start of joy. The hunger is always the start of being full. So there's this caveat baked into the whole situation where it says, bad is predicted and prophesied and promised, but the completion of that is for a while. Death and pain and abandonment and addiction and depression, anxiety, separation, battle lines, power, hunger, disease. My mom would say, this too shall pass, and she would be right. Or if you prefer, our good friend Samwise Gamgee, whom we've talked about a lot in here, sums up the gospel in one beautiful sentence when he says, everything sad is going to come untrue.